why change on your packaging line can be hard. Tips from Grantek's Smart Packaging Solutions Group to make change less challenging. Can advance, Tony. So before we get into introductions and the kind of packaging change we're going to talk about and how to handle it, just some guidelines on getting the most from your webinar, and our marketing slides edited. So please remove any distractions, use the chat. You can put questions in the chat at any point during the presentation. We will be holding them kind of to the end. Recommend you do take some notes, and we will be asking a series of polls. So please do answer on the polls. This really helps us understand who the audience is, understand what point you're at on your packaging journey and what's going on, and can help us kind of tailor this a little bit on the fly to help you get the most from it. So today's presenters, I'll introduce myself first and then ask my other Smart Packaging Grantek colleagues to introduce themselves. So I'm Dave McKenna. I am the practice leader of our Smart Packaging Group. I've been with Grantek since 2003 and happy to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Tony. I've been at Grantek for almost 8 years now. I'm one of the technical sales reps for the Smart Packaging team here at Grantek.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for joining the webinar today. My name is Cole Riddle. I am also a technical sales representative in the Smart Packaging Solutions Group here at Grantek, and happy to help with any of your smart packaging needs.
So just 2 minutes or less, under 2 minutes, about who Grantek is. Don't like vendors who talk too much about themselves. We want to respect your time. So Grantek's a system integrator and business solution partner. We have around 200 plus engineers, and we are across North America. You're going to hear a lot about packaging integration projects and solutions. So a lot of what we do for the topic of this today. And that's the kind of change areas we're talking about is in packaging. So we do a lot of packaging verification systems to make sure the right product's in the right package. We integrate with printers. We do code data inspections. That's really our area of expertise. The rest of the company has areas of focus on industrial safety and general automation needs, from fuses, push button switches up to SAP integration and everything in between. We have offices across North America and Canada, so across Canada and United States, sorry, I should say, and are active executing projects in Mexico as well, and with a remote office in India. And no more on us, as promised. So who are you? Who are you, and what is it? Who wrote this? Who are you, and what is it you do? To give us a better feeling for who's on the call. So again, we can try and tailor this a little bit to your needs, your issues that you're facing in packaging, your challenges. Are you a quality? Classic line from me. A quality individual? Are you engineering or capital projects? Are you an operations person, leader? Are you a contractor, system integrator, or other service provider in the industry? Or are you an other? So we'll just hold on here for a minute and let a few more come in. So mix of people. We got some operations, some capital and quality. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for voting. One more poll. We're going to do back-to-back polling questions. What changes are happening in your packaging area? Now, you're going to be limited to only pick one on this. But curious, if you had to pick one as the highest, the busiest of these, if you do have multiple of these going on right now, is it additional labels for your end customers for Food Safety Modernization Act, traceability? Is it more automation on the line, general automation? Is it maybe material handling? Is it vision, packaging verification? Is it other, or no, you know what, nothing's going on, nothing's changing, everything's standing still right now? So just give another 12 seconds, less than 12 seconds, and we'll closing the polls across the nation right now. So increased vision, seeing mostly increased vision and a lot of labeling. We have actually, that one I can speak to. We have seen a lot of labeling, additional labeling requirements around. Some of this is around FSMA 204, and some of this is around just customers, particular food service customers, particular grocers they want their own label with this stuff for barcodes, these codes for that. So that's one where the polls kind of echo what we're seeing on there as well. Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Cole now to talk about the changes and what we're going to do today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. No, it's great. It's a great thing to get an idea of everyone who's in the room here and some of the changes that might be happening in your packaging area. We see a lot of different challenges out there in the field, but it's always great learning experience to hear about other challenges, folks may have to overcome and how they do it. So definitely great to see. I'd just like to review the agenda for today's webinar at kind of a high level so that we're all on the same page. So first, we'll go through some packaging trends we see going on in the new year. Then we will get into how changes on your packaging line can be tough. We'll discuss some considerations and give some tips from our experiences. We will also talk through some of these experiences via case studies. And then finally, we'll conclude and summarize some of our recommendations on how to navigate these changes. Next slide there, Tony. Thank you. So right off the bat, we'd like to talk about some packaging trends we've seen for some time as we're kind of on the precipice of the new year here. 2025, it's crazy. It's only less than 2 months away now. So sustainability is a massive trend through many industries, and it's no different when it comes to packaging. As consumers prioritize environmental responsibility, companies are adopting sustainable practices throughout their processes. This involves trends like transitioning from legacy packaging materials, which often includes plastics that contribute to pollution, to more eco-friendly alternatives like biodegradable, compostable, or recyclable materials. This isn't only to reduce their impact on the planet, but it's also to appeal to those environmentally conscious customers. In today's competitive market, personalization is key to engaging customers. Customized package designs tailored for seasonal campaigns or maybe specific regional markets can improve the customer experience. This approach allows companies to stand out on the shelf and create, memorable unboxing experiences that drive sales, as customers they're more likely to purchase products that kind of resonate with their needs and their identity. I don't know about everyone here, but whenever the Christmas sugar cookies come out, I'm always grabbing a bunch of boxes. They're no different from the cookies you can buy at the supermarket earlier in the year, but I don't know.
They feel different.
They feel different. They get me excited for the holiday season, I think is what it is. So yeah, and then around minimalist and functional designs, this is a growing trend that prioritizes efficiency without sacrificing aesthetics. So consumers are increasingly drawn to packaging that is reusable, space-saving, and straightforward. This type of design not only reduces waste by minimizing material usage, but also simplifies the consumer experience, making products easier to store and use. We also see a large focus for manufacturers here, as it helps simplify their supply chain and in some case, material handling within the facility. So as an example, we see a lot of customers moving away from materials they've used for years because they're bulky and difficult from a material handling standpoint. They take up a lot of storage space as well. And they're moving towards materials that are designed to be compact and not take up a lot of space in their initial form. But once they're formed into that final package, they have all the benefits of that original material. And then finally, ensuring product safety and compliance with regulations is critical for brands, particularly in industries such as food, CPG, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics. We work with many companies investing in inspection systems to catch mispacks and defects before the product leaves the building. Implementing these advanced quality control measures, such as automated inspection technologies, they help prevent those costly recalls and really maintain consumer trust. This not only ensures regulatory compliance, but it also protects your brand reputation and encourages a culture of safety and quality throughout your organization.
And if I can add one on that, on a recent
Absolutely.
trip to somewhere, talking with VP Ops at a co-packer, they've been looking into automated inspection for years, 5 years, they told us, and they kind of hadn't found somebody they were comfortable with. Still looking, waiting, and then their clients, their big food companies that they pack for, came down recently and said, you have to put this in now. So there is more, and that they were again aware of this, looking at it, but now kind of their customer is requiring it. So I think there is an increase. We're seeing an increase in that as well, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, great point, Dave. Yeah, these trends, they're not necessarily new. They're likely already known amongst a lot of you listening in. But they are kind of like Dave just mentioned there. What we see as a driving force behind a lot of packaging changes on the plant floor, which kind of leads us into our discussion today about how these changes can be difficult and how to prepare. So here are some things to consider.
Awesome. So we've decided that we want to upgrade our packaging lines due to wanting more sustainable packaging or perhaps new regulations that may cause fines from clients or things like that. So now it's time to consider why change can be so difficult on packaging lines. So what may seem like a simple change may bring in so many surprises you may not even have thought of, not just on the plant floor itself, but with your customers and your internal teams. These challenges range from keeping things standard across multiple sites. So if you require graphics changes, for example, and then if you are making graphics changes, do other plants need to be notified? And they also go from forms of OEE impacts, for example, will your new changes affect the overall output of each line? Or maybe constraints you may not even have considered. So, your HMI location relative to where your operators are working, or the temperature of the room, or even size constraints. So all these things we're going to dive deep into during this presentation. And then feel free to ask any questions as we go through the considerations. Awesome. So the first one we'll talk about is company-wide impacts. So changes for one line at one plant can be much easier to manage. It's a closed system. You're generally aware of how the line runs. It's your facility. You're comfortable with it. There are less stakeholders and people involved. But then when we get to corporate level initiatives, such as adding a new verification system, for example, across all your lines, or brand new type of packaging, for example, and graphics changes, as I just mentioned, many more people are involved, and things start to become harder to manage, and it gets difficult. So some common corporate initiatives that we've seen are like graphics changes. Marketing needs to be involved, for example. You need to consider all of the sites that run this same kind of graphics, but may have different configurations on their line. For example, the case packers are different and don't support a type of material if you're trying to change the material for your packaging line. If you use laser printers, for example, and they're different models all across all your lines and all your facilities, maybe these laser printers that are different models aren't able to do like high def printing for one line. So if you want to introduce laser printing or a new line on your inkjet, one line can do it, sure, because it has this new technology, new laser printer. But another line is like, we have these old dot printers and we're not going to be able to do this. So you got to consider all this stuff. And then other corporate initiatives like label verification or overall equipment effectiveness or OEE monitoring. One thing may work at one site, but may not work at another. For example, some facilities are much newer. When defining the architecture, this may be impossible to have a one-size-fit-all solution because you have different technologies, different network architectures, and then just general plant layouts. So standardizing is super beneficial, but extremely difficult to execute. A lot of overhead and coordination is required. And we've seen a lot of corporate projects fail due to lack of buy-in from all of your sites. So standardizing ultimately can save a lot of money down the line when other bigger corporate projects are happening. It's really important. So here are some ways we recommend to tackle standardizing and working across all your plants for corporate-wide projects. So the first thing we really recommend is have a representative from each site and get their awareness and buy-in. This is super helpful also to better understand how each facility runs and operates. And they can bring in key information, such as vendors they've worked with that have been very successful, some suggestions to your solution, and potential concerns that may only apply to one site but not another. So we really recommend getting the buy-in from all the sites. Once you have the buy-in from all your sites, we really recommend a pilot project. So if you're the first to make this change, pick a line, pick a site, do a pilot project, hash out all the challenges, and then once you have the way the solution runs, and you have all the buy-in from all the plants, and they know what's coming, you can do your pilot, make it work, make it run the way you want, and then you can deploy it a lot to the rest of the sites and plants a lot more seamlessly. And we really recommend doing that.
And just to add on that, so I think the key part as well is site buy-in, but site buy-in led by corporate buy-in and corporate champion who comes in with the right, hopefully that corporate person has the right backing to kind of pull, drag, encourage, help the sites to get in line. That's I think can't be overstated, the importance of that. And on the graphics part, 100%. We've seen different sites with different ages of printers and different equipment, and we print 3 lines and they print 2, and our customer needs this specific text which fills the whole graphics area. So yeah, graphics getting started early certainly being better than later.
You'd also be surprised how many times one plant was like, oh, hey, we already want to do this. And then you bring it to the forefront of all the plants. And now you have a more cooperative team and buy-in from everyone. So awesome. All right, the next consideration, OE impacts.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Yeah, so whether it's a one-line project or multi-site initiative, kind of like Tony and Dave are talking about there, nobody wants to affect their OEE, but at the same time, changes can't be made on the plant floor. We have to accept reality when changes are made to the plant floor. But it doesn't mean we can't plan to minimize the impact we make. So I just want to go through some considerations that might be trivial, but oftentimes it's some of the obvious considerations that have bitten our customers in the past. I'd say introduction of new equipment to a line is one of the biggest changes you could make. Whether it's something small like the addition of a checkware for quality control, or large like the addition of a case packer to increase production capacity. In these cases, and kind of everything in between, there are some questions you should be asking around OEE. Can the new equipment keep up with the line speed requirements of the other systems? Is it going to starve downstream equipment or back up upstream equipment? If this isn't figured out, many stoppages can happen and rack up downtime when you go to commission these. Has the system been integrated with other pieces of packaging equipment, and does that actually functionally work? Is the process flow smooth, or is there a lot of stop and starts? Has the changeover been determined and practiced, and have the operators and maintenance staff been trained to do that changeover smoothly? Does the system have a calibration period maybe where it might not be running at its peak performance? So maybe for a few weeks post-commissioning, there'll be some fine-tuning and adjustments that need to be made. Is that something that's going to happen? If this is known ahead of time, it can be something that's planned and kind of put into production plan, but there are definitely questions you need to be asking. So some tips around introducing new equipment. Make sure there's a proper test plan in place to confirm each of these requirements, and that engineering, maintenance, production, quality, all these stakeholders have signed off on it and agree that it properly covers those use cases. You need to cover those requirements. And then in areas where affecting the OEE is unavoidable, make sure the right teams are aware of how the OEE could be affected and why. For example, if OEE is highly likely to be affected, the production team should be involved to ensure that they're planning for that in their production capacity.
Yeah, we saw this one recently. The easy one is you put something in and it makes you run faster, better, right? That's the easy, you got your ROI. The harder one is when it's regulatory or other quality requirement or customer requirement, and there's going to be some politics in the company of, okay, well, hey, you got to cut our targets, you got to do this. We're getting new equipment, you're slowing us down, and getting ahead of that is better, because there are arguments that kind of come up about that, and then having the right ownership in the business to say this is a requirement, but to head those off.
Absolutely. And then so that's kind of more so around when you're adding new equipment to the line, right? But new packaging introduction or graphic changes, new packaging updates are commonly considered a larger update, because oftentimes you're required to update equipment tooling, or sometimes you need new equipment altogether. But graphic changes are oftentimes overlooked, always considered to be something that they're not always considered to be something that could affect the plant floor. But in both these cases, considerations need to be made that could affect OEE. When it comes to new packaging, you need to make sure proper trial runs have been done, and that all the required equipment can accept that new packaging material or format, whichever it may be. This way, when production starts, issues with the equipment don't have to be troubleshot on the spot and causing downtime. As I mentioned before, this often isn't overlooked because most stakeholders understand the impact of packaging material changes and format, and they plan for it. But where we more commonly see issues are when there's updates around the packaging graphics. These kind of fly under the radar and cause more issues. So maybe like a holiday graphic gets updated and pushed to a carton, and the barcode gets moved to the opposite side of the carton for where it was originally. Now let's say there's an inspection system inspecting that barcode. It's looking on the one side of the package, but now the barcode's on the other side of the package. So it's going to cause some issues. So some tips around what to do when introducing new packaging or graphics. There needs to be collaboration between that packaging team, whoever's making those packaging updates, and the engineering maintenance team who understand how the equipment works, right? They need to ensure the full scope of what this change is going to affect is understood and planned for. And then again, testing the updates on the line prior to that planned production run. This way, if there are any unknown gaps, they get highlighted. A lot of the times you think you've planned for everything, but there are things that just come up out of the blue that, you could have done it 100 times, but this is a new hurdle you haven't experienced before. And that'll pop up in those trial runs. And then when installing new equipment or updating existing, it is important to consider any new or existing failure procedures and how they might affect your OEE. For example, reject systems can be great for quality systems. If a quality system deems a package bad, rejects can be used to remove that product from the line without causing any downtime. However, rejects are directly tied to that quality portion of the OEE calculation. So if the reject is new, it's very important to ensure that reject's working correctly and not causing false positives or false negatives. If there are excessive rejects and you've confirmed the functionalities fine, then that's often that reason needs to be investigated, and that could be due to a new equipment being introduced or something to that effect. Another failure procedure to consider is line stoppages. So when equipment stops the line as part of its failure procedure, does this affect upstream and downstream equipment? If the upstream equipment can't stop, maybe it's a continuously flowing process. Is there some kind of accumulation system in place to allow that upstream equipment to still run while that downstream equipment is down for a period of time? And if there's not an accumulation system, are the procedures in place to reroute that product, if this will be for an extended period of time? So some tips around that would be, depending on if you're installing new equipment or updating existing, make sure that failure procedures are fully understood, documented, and tested. Make sure any SOPs around these failure procedures are created and distributed to the right personnel. And then finally, training without making sure that your maintenance and operators are trained correctly. Downtime can ensue when they are just trying to determine what they should have already been equipped to know, right? And we'll get into some more discussion around training later, but it's a very important piece to make sure your OEE is as least impacted as possible.
Awesome. So we'll bring up a really quick case study just to kind of, help visualize a case where there was a corporate initiative and then it did affect OEE, for example. So, this is this print and apply problem here was a corporate initiative. It was a regulatory requirement to add some new info on some cases. The decision was made to add print and apply to the production line based on some preliminary work that was performed only at one facility. Now, the problem was that once they got to other facilities, they realized that there was a lot of constraints at the other facilities, so things such as line stops and not enough space for the equipment that they chose. So, for example, if the other sites were involved early, they could have probably captured some of these issues and include them in the budget. For example, budget to add modifications to the lines, like to extend conveyor sections, for example. One plant had an accumulation conveyor that was not at any other facility. So this accumulation conveyor made it so that the print and apply solution, like the new equipment that they used, would not work because there was no gap between products, and you need gap for print and apply. So if they had gotten all the sites involved early, it could have helped capture some of these in some preliminary discussion. We also really encourage getting vendors engaged to come and take a look at the lines and offer some solutions, and not just at one line, but at multiple facilities. they can help, capture things that you may not even have considered. Where this plays into OEE, for example, is that, let's say we just did go with one print and apply. You have to stop the line for the facility that had less room for two for redundancy. You have to take off the label, change the label roll, put in the new label, and now you're causing line stops. So that was affecting one plant when the other plants were able to fit in.
And that's not just changeover, right? That's when you
Yeah.
run out of rolls. Every time you exhaust that roll, you're stopping the machine, putting the new one in.
Yep. So yeah, OE impacts that one plant was like, hey, no, we can't do this, and it may have been good at this plant, but not the other. So get a lot of your, as we said, get a lot of the plants involved early. Get some vendors involved, because vendors can come and say, hold on, did you think of this that you would never even have thought about? This is going to affect your OEE, for example. And just a quick case study there. This is pretty common. We're seeing this happen quite often across lots of sites.
Great. So yeah, whether changes on your plant floor are related to installing new equipment or updating existing equipment, the control systems involved are a critical piece that really need to be thought through. Even if there is an integration strategy in place, there are a lot of details that can cause headache on startup. So when it comes to new equipment, you want to think about, has a control narrative been determined on how it interacts with this new piece of equipment, how it interacts with other systems. Oftentimes, equipment is dropped in place, and the integration strategy is kind of a second thought. The best practice is obviously to determine a control narrative between that new piece of equipment and whatever other systems it's connecting to, ahead of time, not after commissioning, or not during commissioning, excuse me. So another question to ask would be, how does this system interface with other systems? Is it via hardwire I/O, Ethernet, a different protocol? Has that interface been I/O checked? Does it functionally work? These are all pieces that you would define within a control narrative, and why it's so imperative that you look at putting one of these together. Does the system have standard controls hardware, such as PLC and HMI? Maybe it is standard controls hardware, but it's a new type of PLC in that manufacturing facility that they have one vendor, let's say a Rockwell PLC, but then this is an Omron PLC that gets introduced. Can your maintenance team support this? Do they have that training to be able to handle this new type of system? Is the new piece of equipment is a black box? Maybe it isn't standard controls hardware, and it's a black box that your maintenance staff couldn't even support if they wanted to. So in that case, do you have support from the OEM long term? Is there support contracts in place to handle any issues that might arise? Is this piece of equipment networked? Has IT been involved in developing a network architecture? Is it strictly going to be on the OT side of the network, controls network, or does it need to be reaching kind of the business network and get networked up to that business network layer? In that case, you definitely need to be involving IT to figure out to make sure you're meeting whatever the requirements are. The other piece is there an MES, a manufacturing execution system in the facility, and does that MES system need to collect information from this new piece of equipment you're putting in, and has this been planned? And then the other kind of area to consider around controls integration is for when you're updating existing equipment. So, all those considerations for new equipment really also apply here, but you'd also want to think about, was all the functionality from that, the legacy piece of equipment captured? Has this functionality been ported over to the new system? Oftentimes we see upgrades where certain functionality that's only used periodically, like a cleaning cycle or something to that effect, hasn't been accounted for. And, you don't find out till an operator goes to use that functionality, and it's just not there. Has the integration with other systems been tested, right? Maybe the older legacy system, it worked fine, but by updating the controls hardware, you've now broken that kind of integration between the two systems. And has that been thought through and been updated? So some tips just around, around controls integration when it comes to your packaging line. ensure someone with controls knowledge is involved to ask the right question, right? And help optimize the introduction of this new piece of equipment for best results. And then depending on network requirements, involve IT early on in the process. We oftentimes see projects that get delayed further than they should because they've involved IT kind of like right at the last minute of the project when they're trying to get this thing installed rather than earlier on, so that IT can plan it into their development cycles.
To add on your existing equipment one, this is the fun part of change is when you're driving change, the best system someone ever had was the one that you just ripped out or replaced. So certainly, and we just bumped into this recently, big importance to know all the features, operations, functions, things of something you're replacing and engage those stakeholders who have that. In cases some corporate led stuff, it's harder, that doesn't always happen, or it's harder to do that, or it may not happen as well. And then there's just bumps after, which is something, again, a challenge of change is everyone loved. Maybe it wasn't that good, but man, they loved what they had when you change it to something new.
I've seen a lot of operators be like, it doesn't run the way the old one did. And then,
so it's bad, even if
it's flashier.
Yeah.
It's newer.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that brings us to another consideration. And, I know a lot of you said you were operations, so you've done a lot of projects and you've executed these, but still it's a lot of times we see these execution of projects kind of just some things are missed and it's tough. So here's some things to consider during execution. So we've talked about the best way to approach execution of the project. As we have talked about, the best way to approach the execution of the project is to ensure enough work has been done during preliminary and design stages to avoid surprises. You don't like surprises during execution. So for your contractors, do they know the site-specific details of what needs to be done? Have they been have they been to your facility? Sure, they do this thing all the time, and they have this package deal, and they're able to give it to you. But your facility has something different that maybe they may not have considered. So really recommend having them on site early and preliminary, but also as you lead up to execution. Have they been given the appropriate support and tools? Is someone on site managing contractors? They depend a lot on each other. So sometimes you have one contractor that will come and say that they need to do this thing, and it's going to completely stop another contractor's work, and that could really derail your downtime. I mean, your schedule. Sorry, your downtime is hard to come by. So you need to understand if one contractor's work is going to affect another contractor's work, then make sure you have that lined up and you have that captured early. So preliminary site visits, as I said, help capture the unknowns. They highlight potential issues and minimize surprises. And we recommend doing this not only preliminary stages, but also like a month maybe before execution, just to make sure that everything is understood across all your contractors. Another issue we see is procurement. I know this one is like,
that sounds harsh.
A lot of you are rolling your eyes. No, sorry, I mean kind of getting hardware.
Not the people.
So has all the hardware been ordered, and do you know your lead times? There's been times where you get to site, your contractors are ready to go, you have your scheduled date, and then your photo eyes haven't come in yet because they just they took 7 weeks to be shipped, and you didn't know that, and you ordered them 4 weeks ago. So it's really important to understand procurement and your lead times. Another thing too is the responsibility and who is buying the things. I mean, I've seen a case where there's a conveyor vendor who was installing conveyors, and there was supposed to be some photo eyes, and the conveyor vendor thought that the client was buying the photo eyes, and then the client thought that the conveyor vendor was bringing the photo eyes. And it's just make sure you know who's buying everything. I know it sounds obvious, but it happens, and we still see it every day. Another thing too is, the integrators require aid on site from your maintenance team or your operators. So make sure you have them lined up. What I mean by this is if you have integrators coming in that are testing some stuff downstream of the case packer, but you need the case packer to be running, the integrators likely don't know how to load the case packer, start it, make it work. So make sure that you have operators set aside to assist them, scheduled in, hey, these 4 hours you're going to be with our integrators and work with them. Because the amount of times we've been held up because we don't have an operator run the line. It happens very often. So it's really good to have a designated resource for your contractors or operators that knows the system and can run and answer questions even while commissioning or execution. Another thing too is, how do you know when the work is complete? Have you verified the SAT or completion checklist? You as someone who's purchasing the services, do you know what the system completion looks like? You don't want your contractors just saying, "Hey, we're done," and then walking out, and then half the things that you thought the system was supposed to do haven't been tested, for example. So make sure that you review your SAT checklist or your checklist, sorry, and make sure that all the testing has been captured. And then finally, project closeout. This seems to be also very common during project closeout. Everybody's done and they're happy to be done, and they leave the site, and you're missing electrical drawing updates. You're missing backups from your PLC or HMI applications. You're missing technical documentation. It's common to see the project closeouts kind of be left behind or not well executed. So make sure that you have all the resources from the contractors at the end of your execution. And that brings us to a case study. Something, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to understand who's procuring things and how things work on the line in preliminary engineering with your contractors. So this case study here, what happened was that we were adding a new label verification solution. And then there was an existing sensor on the line. We said during preliminary stages that we would use that sensor to trigger our cameras. As we got closer to execution, it was actually during execution, that sensor signal could not be accessible. It was wired to a black box, and the vendor of that black box could not be reached. So, we had to get creative. We had to order a new sensor. It took a long time to be sent to the site, and it really slowed things down. But that just shows the importance of getting vendors involved and preliminary engineering.
And these are tough because sometimes you don't want to be. There's a trade-off, and these are conversations we have with customers on how much modification, how much stuff are you adding into that machine, how many new things are you adding, because there's limits to how many sensors and photo eyes you can stack on top of each other, and that one is still needs to be there because it's doing something for the equipment. So there's this balance of reusing, the perils that come with reusing versus putting in new, and the perils that come with reusing when you have non-responsive vendors. I guess that's where it really starts stacking on top of each other. Again, all of this is really earlier discussion, lets you kind of catch those and engage with that vendor, or see that they aren't going to kind of play with others, and then plan appropriately.
And that brings us to our last group of consideration.
Great. So your project's been commissioned, and now the system runs perfectly, and there's no issues for many, many years. Well, as the title of this webinar says, changes to your patching lines are difficult. And that's because, that's not the case. Ultimately, we're dealing with plant floor systems, and there are issues that are going to arise over time. And your maintenance team is often that first line of defense, right? So ensuring they're prepared is critical. Where's the start? With awareness. Most of the time, maintenance teams would be aware of a new equipment startup. But even in cases where it's something like a minor graphic update to packaging, make sure they're aware. Keeping them informed is key to help them pinpoint issues quicker. It avoids them trying to troubleshoot something when they could have just immediately pointed to the new change that's happened, right? If they weren't aware of it, they could spend hours before they figure out, oh, it's because somebody changed the graphic. Training. If there is new or updated equipment, have they had training on this? Not just operator level training, but a more detailed training session where they understand the different failure scenarios and what to do, right? And then in cases where when they have that training and that knowledge, but they still can't solve the issue, what do they do then? What's their procedure? Do they have a procedure in place to escalate the issue to the OEM or to the integrator? Is that local support? Does that mean someone's going to be coming to site, or is that going to be a remote support service provided? If it is remote support, is there a vehicle for that OEM or that integrator to provide that remote support, through a VPN connection or something to that effect? These are things you definitely want to make sure you're planning ahead of time. Software and hardware, right? Does the new or updated equipment have familiar hardware and software, or is it something that's new technology in the building? This kind of feeds back to the earlier point around training, right? We want to make sure that they're trained on the right software. If it is proprietary software too, and it requires contacting the OEM, that's something you want to know. You might have the software, and that's great, but is it the right version? In the controls world, there's tons of different software out there, and there's 100 different versions of each. So a lot of times things aren't backwards compatible too, right? So you need to make sure it's not just the right software, but that version number is compatible with whatever that equipment is. Where is that software too, right? Is it on a laptop, or is it on some kind of remote engineering workstation? Ideally, it's on some kind of workstation, so there's a little more redundancy involved. And the other thing is, have the latest backups been provided, and are they available for the team, right? They could be able to connect to the equipment, but if they don't have the latest backup, that might put them in a hole where they can't make changes as quickly as they'd want to. So some tips, maintenance should be involved from the start of the project and all the way through. We really think that's valuable. Ensure that any new or updated systems include a turnover package, like Tony was mentioning earlier at the end of the project, right? That's technical documentation, any software required, any required backups or electrical drawings. Make sure you're getting all of that technical information at the end of the project, so it's ready for when issues arise. Required software should be accessible for maintenance, and have some kind of redundancy in place, so that doesn't just live on one laptop. Support contracts should be in place. If that is something needed, if an escalation path is needed, these should be set up ahead of time, right? They should be put in place before the end of before the project's commissioned. They shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be something that's ready to go when that system goes live.
And that's one that's honestly surprising, because we do see a lack of capital projects. Corporate engineering people will engage, but not necessarily will not fund plant level support. And then, or there's some ambiguity about it, which is actually the worst, when there's ambiguity about it. And then maybe we're going to do this at a corporate level across all the sites. Maybe then the time drags. Then it's a no. And then the sites kind of get told late, you're on your own. Then there's lags in setting them up. So ideally that's up front, and it's crystal clear if it's a corporate initiative, is there corporate support on it on the back of the project, or no, there's not. Plan accordingly, get something in place.
Yeah, great point. And this case study kind of applies a little bit to that, but more so around in this case, maintenance training was provided in the past to this customer, but heavy turnover resulted in the employees with that training leaving the company. And so, they took that knowledge with them essentially. The software required to support the system was only on one laptop, and that laptop had died. So, the documentation was around, but it was not easy to find, and the maintenance staff that were there didn't know about it. And so really, these all just gave no way for maintenance to support any issues that arose. And they were also unaware of how to escalate. In this case, there was a support contract, but they didn't know how to escalate that issue up to get that help. So eventually the system got turned off, and that's not good for anyone involved. The problem was a very easy solution, but without the right knowledge and tools available, it's an impossible problem to solve. So what could have been done differently? The facility to reach out to the vendor to ensure that these new employees, due to turnover, had the proper training. The required software should have been moved to some kind of engineering workstation, ideally, in a remote environment that has some redundancy. Technical documentation should have been easy to find, and maintenance should have an easy path to escalate that has a very low barrier for use, which was not the case. Okay, great. So I think we're at what looks like our third poll question here. So Same thing, we'll ask the question and we'll just wait for some of the responses to roll in. What has been your biggest challenge from past projects? Has it been the OE impacts, standardizing across multiple sites? Maybe it's line integration, or maybe it's that execution commissioning piece, or like we're just talking about, maintenance support and training.
Polling.
Looks like we're getting some answers in. So OE impacts, we have some around maintenance and support too. It's definitely common. Okay, and yeah, execution and commissioning as well.
Awesome. Yeah, OE impacts is one that, just kind of slips through the cracks very often. Cool. All right, so kind of to conclude, we just kind of highlighted some of the recommendations that take into all these considerations, and here's some things that we recommend from Grantek to help tackle some of these issues. And we've already touched a lot on these, but kind of give you guys a summary. So first thing is understand your requirements. Why are you making these changes? It's really important to know that the vendors you've selected, the teams you have compiled, they all are working towards like the right goal, and what your requirements are. And you're not doing things that you're kind of just doing because you think it's the right path forward. Preliminary engineering, we mentioned this a lot. Get vendors and integrators involved early in person, not just over a Teams call. It's really beneficial to be on site and see things happen, and also across multiple sites. Commitment. Know who to engage. Get, we talked about this for corporate level projects as well. And then even after execution or for maintenance support, get your maintenance team involved, QA, IT, representatives from each site to give you a breakdown of their sites and how they operate. Have the right resources. So technical documentation, make sure that your teams are equipped with all the, handover packages after closeout, and then that they're able to support your systems after startup. Training from your vendors and integrators is super important, so they know how your systems run. So make sure you give your team the right resources to succeed. And finally, think long term. Think about OE impacts, your plant floor layouts. If you keep jamming things into the same line without doing actual upgrades to the line, eventually you're going to run out of space. You need to consider that. Think about the technologies on your lines. Are they starting to get obsolete? Are they no longer supported by vendors? So capture that technology and be on the lookout for what's new and what would really benefit your lines. And then future expansion. Think about kind of plays into the layout and the space, but think about some potential corporate projects that are coming up and how easy it would be for you to integrate on your lines. And if you feel like it might be very difficult, maybe it's time to upgrade. So awesome. That summarizes everything. Thank you so much for listening. So we're kind of going to have questions for the last little bit here until the hour. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them into the chat, and we'll read them out loud and answer some questions. I'll give it a second here. So we just did question here. So how do you recommend approaching selecting a vendor?
That's a good one. I would say you really want to ask questions around trying to figure out if this is something they've done before. Like it depends on what you're doing. Let's say it's a new patching, new piece of equipment going in, and new inspection equipment. Start drilling in on questions to get an understanding of, are they new to this, or is this something they've deployed before and have some experience on? And then how much internal experience do you have with this kind of system? Like, do you really need to lean on this vendor? Because in that case, you definitely want to make sure you have someone with that strong experience. I think that's key.
And just to add, are you looking for what is the? Well, I just blanked on there. This is why we do it. This is part of doing this live. Are you getting is it, I think a key one to call out is, does the vendor fit in the kind of vision you're looking for with vendors? It's just, or is it proprietary or not? Are they open? Are they proprietary? Does that matter? Like for a printer, it may not matter as much, but how does that fit into ideally you're picking people as part of a plan that builds a strategy of a bunch of things those vendors can all do and tie into. Or are they able to support you? And one example of this with a customer we just met was they have a homemade ERP system that runs their entire business and does a million things that they control. So they need somebody who can customize extensively to hook into that, because that can create a lot of value. So are you having someone who fits your bigger strategy of how vendors work in your company?
Thank you for the question. I got another one here. So what are some recommendations you may have for approaching OEE impacts when making changes to a packaging line? Think about changeover. Changeover is a big one. If you're putting in a new labeler or any really piece of equipment that requires material changeover, how are you doing the changeover? Do you have to stop your line to switch out your roll of labels, for example? That's not good. Try to avoid things like that. Is there redundancy so you can just kind of swap the labeler really quickly? Or inkjet, for example, is another common one. Is the ink easily replaceable? How long does it take to swap out the ink? Things like that definitely affects OEE. You should consider.
And I think one we've seen is what is the real requirement to the business, and is there a choice between different technologies, ink or print and apply or whatever? Is there a choice between different technologies, and one has a significantly different OEE impact? So kind of bringing OEE into the beginning, just seems obvious saying it, but bringing OEE up into the beginning of the scoping of the project, as opposed to focusing on the technology purely, or maybe the need, but also what are the OEE trade-offs between different approaches and technologies?
Another question. Thank you for the question. Our packaging line contains a lot of old equipment. How do we know when we should upgrade and what we should upgrade to? What are things we should watch out for? Well, right off the bat, obsolescence. If a product or a PLC is obsolete, if the vendor is saying they no longer support it, if it's running, you don't need to upgrade it if it's working the way it should. But consider maybe because it's no longer supported, if it does go down, you're gonna have a hard time replacing it. So it's always safer for sure to look for those obsolete pieces of equipment and try to swap them out. But yeah, again, if it's running and it's doing okay, and you're willing to take the risk of it going, then
I would definitely. If there's equipment that's is a problem and damaging product or something to that effect, that's low hanging fruit in my opinion. That might be trivial, but yeah, I'd say, But as Tony said, if it ain't broke, sometimes it's good to keep things running. But that can bite you, because if you're leaving in old equipment and it's obsolete stuff, but you're like, yeah, it's fine, it's working, we have spares. Well, eventually you're going to run through those spares, and then what do you do, right? So you got to plan for that.
And the reliability and importance of the equipment. When I personally did a FMEA, did a analysis of a pharma plan of a whole bunch of obsolete equipment, which ones were high importance to the business, and then multiplied those. I forget the CI term for this spreadsheet, but where you rank reliability of it, risk to the business, impact to the business of it, and then a huge piece of equipment that all product went through in the building, a drive blew on it, obsolete drive blew on it, and then it was like panic, and it could have been avoided. So there's but do that work. I think that's the piece, and there is design to understanding these, understanding the impact, understanding the effort to change it, and then chip away at it. Like the really successful manufacturers that we do plan to upgrade stuff, and they do it slowly over, not necessarily all at once, but over time. They're ordering and sorting stuff, and they are maintaining their equipment over time, and then
those priorities get shuffled over time too, for sure.
Yeah.
You could have plans, but maybe there's a regulatory compliance thing that comes down the pipeline, and that's gonna push that priority out of the way. So
great, thank you for the question. I got another one here. What are some upgrades you would recommend to those looking to improve their packaging line?
Question.
Line control if it makes sense. Because again, vendors love to vend, but do you really need these things? But I've seen some successful line control stuff where you do have centralized screens that are kind of and notifications, so your staff have visibility to the operation of the line, and nothing's if there's a jam or something like that. It depends on how many people you have in your building and stuff like that, but you don't want a case where there's jams or things are busted and there's no one around and no one knows about it. For that, that's one that stands out to me. Another one that screams to me is, and again, I'm biased on this, but I'm a fan of inspection systems, particularly for gross defects and things that can happen. So was in a plant, a codator just died, and then everything's still going. So what is the conveyor still running, cases still being produced, and it's a long run from where that printer is all the way down to the palletizer, and there's no one around, there's no one really looking at stuff. So I happen to be there and tell somebody, hey, this thing's not going anymore, and guy stops the line, they starts addressing it. But failing that without having that inspection, it would have been a whole effort to grab all those cases, bring them back, rerun them through the printer, open a quality ticket on it. So sometimes that little bit of detection can really head off an issue getting bigger. That stitch in time saves 9 kind of idea.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that's all the questions. We're also getting close to the time. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their attendance. I just want to remind you that if you are registered, you will receive a recording of the session. And then if you have any questions, you can email them to info@grantek.com. Yeah, thanks again so much. Thanks again for joining the call, and we appreciate your time, and please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.